Planning for college is more complex and expensive than ever. From saving strategies to understanding the ins and outs of financial aid and scholarships, there are critical decisions that can save or cost you thousands. Today, we're going to dive deep into the biggest mistakes families make when planning for college or student loans and how to avoid them. And then at the end, I'll share a few tricks I've been using to put 529 contributions on a credit card. So whether you're just starting to save or navigating the process with your high schooler, this episode will give you all the tools and tactics you need to do it right. I'm Chris Hutchins. If you enjoy this episode, please share it with a friend or leave a comment or review. And if you want to keep upgrading your life, money, and travel, click follow or subscribe. What do you think the biggest mistakes people make are when it comes to planning and paying for college?
Probably the biggest one would be starting too late and not realizing what they're getting into. When I went to college, it was very simple. In your senior year, you visited a college or two. You took the test once, maybe, and then you just signed up and off you went. And you didn't spend a lot of time and effort into the whole process. Well, the next generation are going to spend a lot more time, a lot more effort, apply to more schools, do more visits. It's a bigger deal, and it also costs a whole lot more. I mean, I found my old ACT where it talked about the cost at some of the colleges I was looking at was $6,000 and the state school was $2,000. So it was much more affordable and it wasn't a big deal because of it. Now, when you're spending $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 or more per child to educate them, you want to make sure you're doing it right the first time. A parent hearing, oh, I didn't pick the right major. I didn't pick the right school. I need to start over. I lost a year or two is not something any parent wants to hear.
Yep.
All right. And I think that's the big crux of it is there's a lot you can do, a lot you should do, and most people need the time to kind of figure it out and get involved.
And how early should someone start thinking about this?
Let's talk about the timeline, because I like to divide things into what I call early stage planning and late stage planning. So early stage planning is colleges someday. I've got a 4-year-old. We've got some extra cash flow. Maybe we should save and invest for college. But then we get to what I call late stage college planning. Now you've got a high school sophomore, junior, senior, and you're there. And you may have done a great job of saving a big pile of money, but that you're still not done, right? You've got a lot of work to do around visiting colleges, figuring out just because I have it, do I have to spend it? Should I spend it? How much is a reasonable amount to spend for college? Are the privates worth it? Are the publics worth it? All that work that needs to be done, using loans to fill the gaps, filling out financial aid, all that stuff. That should start, in my opinion, freshman, sophomore year.
Okay.
Especially for your first, because it's a learning curve of, well, I need to understand, will we qualify for need-based aid? Will we qualify for merit aid? And that alone is a very loaded question because it's can get complicated depending on the colleges you're looking at, your financial situation, academics of your student, right? If you've got the academic rock star, they have a lot more options and can get a lot more scholarships at a lot more colleges. So, but if you have the B student or the C student, there's still colleges that are right and a good fit for your student. It changes though from one student to the next.
I would imagine that the early planning before that high school mark, the primary thing you can do is really just think about whether you're going to save in a different way. Is there a lot more to do other than saving and deciding where to save?
I think that's probably it. And then the amount that you need to save, right? So yeah. Harvard is approaching $100,000 a year and the other elite schools are, but a lot of families don't pay $100,000. So a lot of financial advisors get this wrong, right? They look up the list price of a college and they say, okay, well, the list price is $75,000. So based on the math, you need to save $1,200 a month, for the next 18 years or something crazy like that. And then it turns out, well, actually, you get a pretty substantial scholarship at some of these colleges. So $75,000 should have been $40,000. And of course, most people, when they hear that $1,200 and they say, I've got 3 kids, that's $3,600. I'm not interested anyway. There's a few that would do it, but most families are not saving like they're going to hit those goals and probably shouldn't be in a lot of cases.
Yeah, I think my personal strategy has been there's probably a really wide range of what college could cost. and tying up the low end of that range in an account like a 529 seems to make sense. But with a little bit of uncertainty on so many things. What does college look like? Does your kid go to college? How much does it cost in the future? I'm okay if there's a slightly less optimal tax outcome for some of the money I'm saving, knowing that I might not even need it for college. So, if I backed into what does the most expensive college in America, adjusted for college inflation, like divide, dated back to how much I need to put in each month. If I don't want to overfund to the point that it might just be stuck there because, and you probably know this better than me, what happens if you have a bunch of money in a 529 and you don't need it for your children? And let's just assume you're not, at generational wealth level and want to save it for future generations. You usually have to pay a penalty to take it out. Is that right?
Right. If you take it out for non-education purposes, you have to pay some taxes and some penalties. So it's not advisable. Yeah. So in those situations, there's ways to unwind it. You can take money out up to the amount of scholarships that your student receives. You can switch it from, child to child within the family, and it can get broader than just brothers and sisters. You can go to nieces and nephews. You can shift it into a Roth IRA now. There's some new rules for that. Account needs to be 15 years old. So there's lots of things you can do. Quite frankly, it's not a problem I deal with very often. Much more likely is we're coming in underfunded, not we've got so much money we don't know what to do with it.
I think the fear a lot of people have is, what if college isn't there? What if they're just like spending their days building things on ChatGPT or whatever the future of that looks like, and they're worried that not that they haven't saved enough, but that they just don't need it. And so it's good to at least understand, yes, there are taxes and penalties. You can roll it over to a Roth IRA, but I think it's capped at like $35,000. But the negating, if they do get a scholarship, I guess you can withdraw that amount. So that's interesting.
Right. You still pay taxes, but you avoid penalties. So now it kind of shifts it to like a typical investment.
So it wouldn't have been better to do that in a 529.
No, it just takes some of the pain away.
I did an episode on tax advantaged accounts. I think we talked a bit about 529s where I'm doing mine. The only other couple things I'll add on 529s is it really varies depending on what state you're in, whether there are even more tax benefits. In California, there's really the federal tax benefit of letting your investments grow and not being subject to capital gains on the growth is kind of consistent. But some states give you, benefits on donations to your 529 or contributions. California doesn't. So I think, one, it's important to look at what your state's rules are. And then two, you are not required to use your state's 529. So that doesn't mean that if Colorado has a tax benefit for state taxes, I can get that tax benefit using Colorado's 529. But it does mean that if I live in a state where the investment options are bad and I don't like them, or the fees are high, I could use a Nevada or a Utah or another state's 529 in California. If I were in a state where there were great tax advantage, I might not want to.
And 20 years ago when 529s were just coming out of the gate, they were expensive. They were quite expensive, especially in some states, and it just wasn't worth it. And it made sense to forego the state benefits in order to get to a lower cost option. Now it's a much more mature industry, and every state that I've run across has a low cost option or a reasonably cost option. It may not be the absolute lowest, but now we're talking, this one's 40 basis points instead of 20 basis points. Whereas 20 years ago, when I was first saving for my kids, it was like this one's 3.5% and this one's 1%. It was a huge difference. Right. It's a huge difference and very substantial. Now they're all small, relatively speaking. And yes, it's half as expensive. You can get to 3 basis points instead of 6 basis points, but it's not material. So compared to the cost and the state benefits. So yeah, obviously you need to be careful. There's lots of pros and there's lots of cons when it comes to 529s, and you really want to understand what you're getting into and CUIA, talk to an advisor or whatever you need to do so that This is not a recommendation for 529s per se. But yes, there's lots of great things you can do with them. And I do spend a lot of time working with families saying, well, these are the state benefits and we probably should take advantage of them and we should leverage it a little bit. Maybe we should make sure we get to the maximum contribution limit and then stop. Or even if we go over the limit, again, I'm doing a lot of late stage planning. So I will have situations where, okay, we've decided that we're going to go to the more expensive school. So we're 100,000 short and we need to get that, we need to deal with that in the next 4 years. So we're literally going to start putting 2,000 a month away or 3,000 a month away in order. And then it's like, well, which 529 or should it be a 529 and like that? And it becomes, again, some optimization challenges.
There are 529 limits. I believe right now it's $18,000. But that's per kid, per giver.
So you're talking about the gift tax rules where you're allowed to gift, but education is an unlimited exception to the gift. And 529s will allow you to do some 5-year gifting as well. So there's lots of things.
Super funding. And if you're a parent and you're paying for education for your own children, there's really no gifting going on. You're just paying a bill that you need to pay. But if you wanted to contribute to a 529 in those final years and you're $100,000 short, then the limit is $500,000 or so typically. So a typical 529 company says, what does it cost for one kid to go to the most expensive school we can find? And then that's the limit. So right now it's, about 500,000. Most 529s will accept. So again, the limits generally are not what we're butting up against. It's people don't have that kind of money anyway. Okay, so that makes sense. I have seen you talk a little bit about two things. One, where you put money may impact your eligibility for aid. And so if you were putting all of this money in a 529, while that could be more tax advantaged for paying for college, could it have an impact on your eligibility for aid over putting it in your retirement account? How do you think about those kind of decisions? Right. Well, that's why I enjoy working with late stage college planning, because I'm working with, teenagers where we've only got a few years to go. And it's relatively easy to look ahead and say, well, what will your income and your assets look like when you have a kid in college? Now, young people, I have a tough time giving them advice because it's like, well, your career takes off and your income climbs and now you're not going to qualify for need-based aid anyway, or just because of your income. So don't worry about where you put your money. Or, maybe you're a teacher or for whatever reason, your income is a little bit lower and you will qualify. And now you wish you wouldn't have put as much money into the savings and so forth. So how does that work? What accounts matter towards qualifying? Right. So need-based aid is based on income and assets of the parent and the student. And income is taken from your taxes. So it's typically your AGI. And then they add back in some untaxed income sometimes. So there's a couple of wrinkles in it. So one of the worst things you can do is to set up an UTMA account or some other account in the student's name. And we don't see it as often, but sometimes grandma and grandpa still do this, where they're going to set up an account, put the kid's name on it. Well, now it's a student asset, and they assess student assets more heavily than parent assets. So we want to avoid that. If the parents earn $500,000 a year, they're not going to qualify for aid, most likely anyway, no matter where they have assets or what's going on. So it doesn't matter where you save it from a financial aid standpoint. But if you're certainly if you're under 100,000, you will qualify. And if you're under 300,000, you might qualify at the right schools. So, and that's the other challenge is we don't have a hard cutoff. It's a slippery slope, similar to taxes, right? As your income climbs, you get less aid, but there's never an automatic zero. It just gets worse and worse. And eventually you're not going to qualify. And I assume someone who's been a high earner for their entire life, if they're like, oh, well, my kids are about to go to college, now might be a good time to take a sabbatical and kind of not earn anything for a year. Is that a viable way to alter your income for these things? Or how far back are they looking? And how much do your assets count versus your income? Right. So let's talk a little bit more about assets, because your assets count against you, but they give you a pass on a lot of assets. So
typically your retirement doesn't count. So anything that's a pension, profit sharing, 401ks, IRAs, all that stuff is not counted against you.
Okay.
For the federal method, the FAFSA, your primary residence doesn't count. So your home equity, your big mortgage, all that stuff just doesn't show up. What does show up? Well, anything that's not retirement. So your savings, mutual funds, exotic investments, crypto, something like that. Those are all assets. You'd have to report those. Stock options at work that are not tied into an actual retirement plan would count. Real estate that's not your primary residence. So if you have vacation land or property, if you have business property, farms, some of those things would count. And then the other big one is college savings. So your 529s would count and those types of things. Now,
what about if you owned a business?
The value of your business.
But it's a private business, like a dental practice.
There's a big change on the FAFSA. So businesses used to, if it was under 100 employees, businesses were out in the past. They are now in, which is a big change. But I've seen families, you can have $1 million in assets and still qualify, $2 million, if your income is lower. But it's a combination of income and assets.
Okay. And there's no hard rule, right? There's not a document that says if you have over $1.35 million, you're going to qualify.
No, exactly. So the way it works is they take your income, your AGI, and let's say that's 200,000. And then they take your assets and they multiply it by a factor and then they add it to your income. So $1 million times 12%.
Okay. So they're just kind of assuming your assets earn a certain amount.
Exactly. So your $1 million becomes, they apply 12%. So that's equivalent of an additional 120,000 of income. So now your 200,000 of income goes to 320, which reduces the amount of aid you're eligible for. And at a lot of schools, that might disqualify you. So that $1 million may hurt you. Now, again, then you mentioned, well, then let's go on a sabbatical. That only works for 1 year, unfortunately. It's a year-by-year thing for financial aid. So as an example, if you have a senior right now that's going to graduate in 2025, they're going to look at you fill out financial aid right now, 9 months ahead of time. And you use 2023 taxes. You're going to do it all over again next year and the next year and the next year using 23, 24, 25, and then 26 for that same student. So you need a long sabbatical. Or a lot of times there's some dramatic changes that families go through as well, right? A divorce, a death, a sudden unemployment, or tough times in the family business or something like that, where you take advantage of it where you can. And sometimes it lasts multiple years. Sometimes it's a 1 year blip. And then even with planning, you might say, well, I'm going to alternate years. It's kind of like you do for some tax strategies. This is the year I'm going to have good income, and this is the year I'm going to try and minimize it, and then play some of those games. So you should start looking at this freshman, sophomore year, because I run into a lot of parents of seniors that say, really, it's going to be based on last year's taxes? Well, I can't change last year's taxes. It's like, exactly. Now, if you have a sophomore or freshman, now we're talking about a 2027 graduate that's going to use a 2025 taxes. And you can say, oh, I actually can impact 2025 still. That's in the future. So that's why I think some families need to start early, because there's some things that you want to pay attention to. There's a couple gotchas, like a self-employed individual who puts money into retirement may not get a benefit from that. It does bring your AGI down, so it should help for aid, but they're going to add it back in if they can find it on your 1040. Whereas if you put the money into retirement at work, where it just reduces your W-2, then they can't find it, and then they can't add it back in. So a self-employed plumber who's married to a teacher probably should save in the teacher's accounts, not the plumber's accounts, because it won't show up. It'll bring your income down. Again, the big caveat, of course, is if it's going to matter, right? Bringing your income down from 400,000 to 350 may not make a difference.
And when you go to fill out these forms, you mentioned, retirement accounts don't count. Do people, that means they're not pulling this data. You're self-submitting it. So if you make the mistake of just listing your retirement account, are they going to say, oh, no, that doesn't count? Or do you have to remember to not put it on the form?
You have to remember. I mean, the FAFSA, the other change that came is the FAFSA got quite a bit simpler now. So there's 3 questions. How much do you have in the bank? What are your investments worth? And what are your businesses and farms worth? And then there's a little info button where you can read a little bit more. But that's it, right? You add up all your investments and you put it in the investment blank. They're not getting there's no way for them to audit what you put in or anything. It's just, they might audit in the future, but they're not going to say, oh, no, it looks like you put in your 401k. You made a mistake. Nobody's going to catch that for you.
Wow. Okay. And you listed 3 things, but you didn't mention debt. So if I have an auto loan, that doesn't count as a negative.
Nope. The only debt that would matter is the net value of your business. If you had business debt or farm debt, that those would offset. And I guess if you had debt on real estate that you're listing as well, that would offset.
But if I had some loans and I was thinking I wanted to lower my assets and I paid those loans off,
that would work.
That would change the situation.
Absolutely. I always give this example. You had $50,000 in the bank and you have a bill on your desk for siding and windows. Well, you spend that $38,000 before you fill out the FAFSA, not after.
Yeah.
Because obviously it will bring down the assets that you list.
Now, if you have $20 million in assets, it probably doesn't matter.
Correct. Exactly. Right. So knowing where that line is, and it varies. The other thing we didn't talk about is there's something else called the CSS profile, which is the additional forms that many of the elite colleges use. So Harvard and Yale and Rice and Notre Dame, et cetera. So there's about 300 colleges. These colleges can be very generous. Stanford just put out a press release that said if your income is under $100,000, Stanford will be free. 0 tuition, 0 room and board. If your income is between 100 and 150, then tuition will be 0, and you still have to pay some or maybe all of room and board.
You didn't mention assets there.
Doesn't matter. Now, there might be, I think there is an asterisk on that where you'd have to be within reason. So I don't know what they would consider within reason meaning, right? Certainly the multimillionaires that have the accountants that can drive their income to whatever they want, they are not going to get away with it. But if your income is a $98,000 and you happen to have $400,000 of investments, I don't think they're going to count those $400,000 against you.
Wow.
That's not unusual, right? To have a family that saved some money. But there is an asterisk on that chart that I was looking at. But for the FAFSA itself, there's also what we call the magic Pell numbers, and they're low numbers. Say, a typical family, maybe if they can get their income below $75,000, they don't have to list their assets. So I've been working with a few families that have inheritances, but relatively low income. And we don't have to list the inheritance if we can drive their income lower.
You would have to list it if they had higher income.
Correct. I mean, if you inherit grandpa's house and you inherit grandpa's bank accounts and CDs, they're assets, and you have to report them. And then if you sell the house, well, you don't have to report the house, but now you have a pile of cash. So same problem.
But similarly, if you sold a house and you're going to owe the IRS a lot of money that year, but you haven't paid those taxes yet, that you don't get to count your future tax bill. So pay those taxes before you fill out the form.
Absolutely. And if you've got a little time, right? If you've got a high school freshman, you can say, well, I can max out. And this is some of the things that we're doing, right? It used to be I couldn't afford to put all $30,000 into my retirement, and my spouse put another $30,000 into their retirement and max the HSA and do Roth IRAs. I mean, who has that kind of cash flow? Well, you just inherited $300,000. You don't need the cash flow anymore. You've got the money to get it done. And a lot of times that's what, you could accelerate doing that type of thing. And that, of course, helps you manage your AGI as well, which now it makes it more likely that you can qualify, right? My income is $110,000 and my target is $75,000. Well, if we each put $30,000 into retirement, that's $60,000 off. that will bring us down and we'll have a shot at it. Yeah, but if I put all my money in retirement, what do I live on? Well, you live on your inheritance, which has the added benefit of, when now those assets go away, your retirement grows dramatically, your other assets shrink dramatically, which is good for financial aid, and your income is low, which is good for financial aid.
Could you just replace inheritance with savings in this case? Like if you...
Yeah, any sudden money or any pile of money would work, right? So if you just happen to have $500,000 in the bank for whatever reason, whether it's inherited or whatever, and you want to make that shift, perhaps you could, or 100,000. It doesn't have to be big numbers; it could be smaller numbers.
Yeah. So if you're in the financial independence, retire early, and you've saved up enough money to retire before your kids go to college, and your income is effectively you can drive your income to $50,000, you'd be in a pretty good space for FAFSA.
Correct.
There are schools that can ask for other information. So that doesn't mean you're good for every school.
Exactly. So, right. That CSS profile that we mentioned earlier, that's additional information that the colleges want because they're so generous, right? If we're going to give out $40,000, $50,000, $90,000 scholarships, we want to have more information than what the FAFSA provides.
Yeah.
So they use the CSS profile. The FAFSA is like 32 questions now. The CSS profile is like 300 questions. I mean, they get every detail. What do you have in every account?
An example someone gave me was that they might ask what kind of car you drive. And maybe this was for private school, I'm not sure, but they're looking for people who can't afford college. If you say, gosh, I don't have any income this year, but we drive 2 Ferraris, they're like, I don't know about that.
Right.
So they can look at a lot more things.
Right. And they will also ask for copies of your taxes. They'll ask for copies of your business taxes. And, again, they'll just dig a little deeper because, Harvard and Yale and some of these high-end schools, they've got a lot of customers, so to speak, who have the high-powered accountant that can make their taxes say whatever they want. And they don't want those people gaming the system when in fact their goal is to help people that really need it.
Yeah. And I don't think most of the people listening here are sitting with hundreds of millions of dollars and have super high powered accountants and,
Right.
don't have to work and can play this. So, let's dial back in. So on the need-based aid, you can fill out these forms, but I think some people might think, there's financial aid at the university, but that's not the only source of financial aid, right?
That's correct, right? So financial aid is very broad, and it would include work and loans and grants and scholarships. And the sources, the big sources would be the colleges themselves, but also the federal government. The federal government has Pell Grants and certainly lots of student loans, and it can be doled out either merit-based or need-based.
Okay.
So figuring out, well, does my student qualify for merit aid? And I think there's a challenge, right? You take a rock star student that can get into Notre Dame, let's say, but just barely, just barely getting into Notre Dame, you're still a really strong student. Now that student could go to some local university and maybe get the top scholarship and, get a $30,000 merit scholarship. And they also might be able to go to another university where they're the presidential scholar that gets the full ride. Now, there's a lot of parents out there that say, well, my kid worked so hard, he deserves Notre Dame, and we're just going to write big checks and pay for it, which is fine. Some families, that's the goal. But again, you also have the option of going to different colleges and getting $30,000 off a $70,000 school. Now you're net 40 instead of Notre Dame at 84, let's say. And then there's this school over here that will cover all of tuition and you just pay room and board, or maybe they'll even cover room and board and you can go for free. Now, that school is not world renowned like Notre Dame. Most people have never heard of it. But if the price is right, again, a lot of times those same kids go on to be doctors and lawyers. It's just an undergrad degree. Spending a lot of money isn't automatically the better path, as much as the colleges would like you to believe, and all the private school industry. Same with private high schools, right? I mean, they are selling stuff as well.
Totally. I went to a public state school in Colorado State University. I felt like I got a good education. I turned out okay. And I didn't have that Ivy League education, and we saved a lot doing that.
Yes. But on the flip side, if you think your kid's on the way to be president of the United States and you have the option of sending him to the Ivy League, you probably should. Because if you look at where presidents tend to come from, it is the Ivy League. So you need those connections. You need those, so there are benefits to it, without a doubt. Whether the benefits are worth it for your situation is the bigger question.
So with all the needs-based aid, we kind of talked about some of the forms. On the merit aid, is income a factor at all?
Generally not. Now, there are some programs where it's both, right? So Bill Gates ran a program where they were paying a lot of money and helping with great, fantastic 100% scholarships. But in order to qualify, you had to be academically strong and had to be Pell Grant eligible, which meant your family income had to be below $70,000 or something, right? So you had to be relatively high need, low income, and be an academic rock star to win those scholarships. And they were full rides, so it was worth it if you could manage it.
I know there are lots of different scholarship programs outside of schools. How does someone even begin to put together a plan for finding scholarships and merit aid?
You go to tamingthehighcostofcollege.com/scholarships. So I have the scholarship guide for busy parents. It's 4 videos that are each about 10, 12, 15 minutes. The goal of it is so you can learn enough to know about what types of scholarships are a right fit for you. I mean, I had a family fill out 41 scholarship applications and they won 7 for $39,000. But they're the exception. They're not the rule, right? And if you're going to work that hard at it, you need to know what you're getting into. And that's the reality, right? Is families that should work that hard at it because they could be successful run out of time because they don't start early enough, and therefore they don't do the 40 applications. They do 6 or 5 or 0. And then other times families, again, students are busy, parents are busy. Somebody has to do all the hard work for scholarships, and it could be worth it.
I met this woman who was speaking at a conference called FinCon, and she had applied for so many grants and scholarships that it was more than the cost of attendance. And some of these grants that she was eligible for were paid her in addition to the cost of room and board. She actually made 6 figures in grants and scholarships after paying everything off. If you had asked me if that was possible, I would have said no. And, she was on her way to $1 million before she graduated from qualifying for so many different grants and scholarships.
Right. And again, that would be very much the exception and not the rule. So yes, it is possible.
But if your kid's very academically strong, putting in the extra effort to kind of find all these things. And one thing, I don't think you mentioned this, but that guide you've put together with 4 videos, it doesn't cost anything.
That's great. It's free video
kind of running
series.
Through that.
You can catch it on YouTube.
Yeah, we'll put the link in the show notes.
There's a place for everyone, however. 70% of graduates go out, do at least start college in some form. And that's down maybe to 66 or something. I think it's slipped a little bit. But 2/3 of the population coming out of high school goes on to some sort of college. And college, broadly speaking, is not just a 4-year degree. It's a 2-year degree. It's all the different programs. And all of it is appropriate because it all requires need-based aid, financial aid. It's all part of the federal system. Can all be planned for.
One strategy I've heard from some parents is, if you want to save on college, but you really want that great degree, can you go to a local community college for 2 years, get the credits in some of the basic classes, and transfer into a more competitive, academically strong, higher, reputation college for the last 2 years? What do you think about that strategy?
I think it's a great strategy, but you need to do your homework. And it's becoming a lot easier now. There's been many states have had mandates now where they set up paths where you can go to community colleges or even just some of the outlying colleges and then transfer to the flagship school to finish your degree. And if you are sure your credits are going to transfer and you understand, both schools really well and it's all put together, that can be great. But I have had situations where, okay, well, I got 62 credits and I transferred and they only accepted 32. So I lost a year anyway.
Which could hurt into your savings. And it probably, I don't know the answer to this, but I'm guessing it's not as effective of a strategy if the goal is to save money on an Ivy League school versus a tier 1 state school.
Correct. Right. It would be relatively hard to transfer into some of these schools. And again, if you've got a kid that's strong, money is a lot of times the Ivy Leagues, the high end, they're going to be so generous that they're going to be the low cost option and they're going to be cheaper than the local community college. They're going to be free. Remember, if your income's under 100,000, they're free. They're the low cost option.
Yeah.
The challenge is you got to be an academic rock star to get accepted. That's where I think a lot of people need to understand that there's wide variability in pricing. It's like an airline seat. You don't really know what the person sitting next to you paid. They could have used their frequent flyer system or gotten the right credit cards and played the game and paid nothing for the whole family to go on vacation. And then someone sitting next to them is like, well, I need to be in Boston tomorrow. And they put their Diners Club on the counter and they didn't care what it cost. And they paid $4,000, at the counter to leave immediately.
So it sounds like, especially if you're at the low income, there's a lot of options for savings. For anyone on the higher income, I don't want to spend a ton of time focused on them because they can't afford this, but is there it's still a massive cost, right?
Yeah, right.
For someone who doesn't qualify for need-based aid, how should they be thinking about this?
Probably half the people I work with don't qualify for need-based aid per se, but they still send their kids to college. So now, sometimes the colleges you're looking at will ultimately be full price. And you have to decide, well, am I going to write a check for 90 or am I going to pursue other schools where maybe you get some merit aid or, again, your local state school might only be 30 and, kind of finding that balance. But there's still a lot you can do, right? There's tax planning, there's saving and investing, there's merit aid, there's negotiating with the schools, there's a lot of planning, just realizing that need-based aid is not on the list. And that's where I think a lot of people get a little confused is there's a lot more to it than will I qualify for need-based aid or not? Because even if you don't, you're still going, and now it's going to be expensive. So how are we going to raise those kind of funds? And it's a lot, like, again, at the higher incomes, it's a lot more tax planning. It's a lot more negotiating with schools. It's understanding the CSS profile. And it's understanding, again, I had a dad earning $450, had 2 kids in college, and he got need-based aid. Now, again, it went from $90,000 per student to roughly $70,000 per student. But that we consider that a win. $40,000 a year.
Okay, so you talked a little about tax savings. We haven't talked about student loans. What should people be thinking about when it comes to taxes to kind of optimize the cost of college? On
top of that, there's the opportunity credit that phases out between 160 and 180 if you're married, and 80 and 90 if you're single. So some people can, I've worked with families where it's like, okay, how do we stay under 160 so we can take advantage of this credit?
How much can that credit be?
Up to $2,500. So,
and that's per year per student?
Per student, yes.
Okay.
Up to 4 years. So it's roughly $10,000 per student. So again, a lot of times it's, if I chose to put this money in the Roth version at work, if I'd have put it in the deductible version, I would have gotten the credit. So maybe I should do that.
Or if I had put money in the HSA and
exactly.
When there's these hard requirements, it's really kind of dialing in the levers. If you're making, $800,000 a year, it doesn't matter. But if you're making somewhere between 150 and 180, depending on how you contribute, this is a year to pay attention.
Right, exactly. And then if you're a business owner, if you have inheritance, if you're divorced, there's a lot more levers to pull and a lot more things you can do. Like business owners, hiring the kids in the business and paying them a wage, making them independent so that, again, if you lose the benefits for claiming your own student, well, then stop claiming them and have them claim themselves and then figure out how to transfer income to them. Hire them in the business. So if your income's $600,000 and up, or roughly, and somewhere in that neighborhood, all of a sudden you start losing all the benefits of having children and then their deductions and that kind of stuff. And if let's say you're operating a restaurant, it's like, and your kids show up and work shifts, well, pay them well and make them independent versus giving them $100 under, or saying, well, that's what you have to do because I'm paying for your college, so you have to show up at the restaurant and work for free. No, do it the other way around. Pay them well, have them pay for college, because when they pay taxes, they'll pay less than mom and dad.
Yeah, and they'll be eligible for these credits also.
And they'll be eligible for the credits. So they'll have a tax bill. They'll be at lower rates. They'll have some taxes, and they'll be able to use the credit. Whereas mom and dad can't use the credit. They won't get any benefit for claiming. So again, and a lot of accountants kind of understand this and can help you with it. But sometimes you got to kind of lead them to the water before they, really jump in with you. And I think those are the big ones, probably. Oh, if you inherit things like Roth IRAs and IRAs, so you've had inherited, there's a lot of planning there that can be done.
At the end of the day, we're not going to be, you've done a podcast with over 100 episodes on this topic. I've read articles of yours. I've gone deep. Like, we obviously can't cover everything. So I think my goal today is to at least touch on things. And if someone listening to this is like, oh, I am a restaurant owner, you're going to have to go a little deeper, right? If you're like, oh, my kid is that academic rock star, you're going to have to go a little deeper. So I'll link to a bunch of those things in the show notes, but by no means is this meant to be the most comprehensive guide, because we just couldn't do it in the time we have, especially given how much I've seen you've created on this. So
yes, exactly. So we've got, at our website, we've got the cost of colleges by income that will help you understand the true net cost of college. That's a great resource. We've got financial aid calculator where you can, again, work that out. We offer a free email newsletter where we kind of remind you, here's some new stuff. Here's some new stuff. So I think that's one of the big challenges as a parent, and myself included, college is important, but it's not the only thing going on. And weeks go by and you go, oh yeah, we were supposed to call the college, or, oh yeah, we were supposed to, and it just doesn't get done. And starting early is another challenge, right? I'd like to start in my sophomore year, but I don't really know what to do or how to do it. Well, again, Scholarship Guide for Busy Parents is a great place to start. Start learning about need-based aid and merit aid and understanding, because you can plan as a parent whether your student is ready or not. Because I see that a lot too. Well, we can't do any planning. My kid doesn't know what they want to be when they grow up. We're not even sure if they're going to college. They're only a freshman or sophomore. We haven't quite figured it out. It's like, well, you can start planning anyway. Maybe you can't visit colleges yet because your student's not ready, but you can figure out the parent side of college planning.
Okay, we didn't talk about student loans. So how should people be thinking about student loans right now? And how would that change depending on whether it's out of necessity or not?
Yeah. So student loans are just another tool in the toolbox. And some people will take true student loans in that they're, what's available through the federal government or through the credit unions or whatever. Other people will borrow money for college, but they'll do it as a home equity line of credit or margin loans, or all the different ways where they can say, well, I can borrow money cheaper. Why wouldn't I do that? And the answer is, well, maybe you would borrow it cheaper some other way, if you can. But there's a lot of families out there that can't borrow it cheaper because they don't have enough home equity, or they've already used it, or whatever it might be. And then the federal student loans are decent, but they can be beaten in the private market if you've got strong credit and that type of thing. And they're just a tool where, for some families, the reality of it is college with loans is better than no college, almost for sure. Especially if it leads to a career that you need the college for. If you want to be an accountant or a nurse or a teacher, well, and you need to use some loans to get there, well, that's climbing the socioeconomic ladder. That's the way it works. Typically that's the first generation college student is how they're going to do it. Second generation, mom and dad might be able to pay or help, and then, and so forth. But they're not good and they're not bad. If the math works, great, go ahead and use them. Now, the challenge, I think, is the student cannot borrow much in their own name again, the typical 18-year-old coming out of college, they can borrow $5,500 for their freshman year. Mom and dad can borrow the rest. So, pick the expensive school, that's $90,000. Student borrows $5,500. Mom and dad could borrow $84,000 and pay for it all with a loan. I'm not saying you should. I'm saying you could.
People who graduate with hundreds of thousands of dollars of student debt, is that often that their parents were the ones that kind of co-signed on these loans?
Right.
Even though I have lots of friends who are still paying off student loans. Like, are those loans all technically their parents, but they're, taking that responsibility? Or how did they end up in that situation?
Right. So parents either co-signed or grad school. Once you have your undergrad, if you go on for a master's or doctor, lawyer, all that stuff, lots of people can borrow lots of money there. Once you go on to the advanced degree, the game completely changes, and most aid is just loans, and it's also quite expensive now. So the typical doctors and lawyers out there could borrow hundreds of thousands in order to get through the process. They don't necessarily have to, but a lot of them end up, needing to. Or again, mom and dad co-signed in the private market, where the primary borrower is the student, mom and dad co-signed. And I think that's where, again, I work with parents, and parents need to be the adult and say, I'm not willing to co-sign this much debt. We have to find a better path. And I think the biggest frustration that I see out there is when mom and dad have strong income and strong assets, disqualifying the student from most aid. But then their philosophy is, we're not paying for college because I worked hard, and therefore you work hard and you figure it out. I don't believe in college, or I paid for my own college by borrowing or whatever. And then that student is just kind of stuck unless the parent is willing to sign or co-sign.
I never really thought about it from the perspective of parents, that if you didn't have a lot of money and you weren't willing to pay for your kids' college, it might have been a lot cheaper for them.
Yes.
Is there an argument for people who can and are planning on paying for their students' college to still take out loans?
Yes. I mean, wise use of debt in any financial plan makes sense, and abuse doesn't, right?
This is an area where I don't have a lot of expertise, but a mortgage, maybe you might have to pay a high interest rate right now, but that interest is deductible on, up to $750,000 of mortgage. Are there any kind of rules like that that make it such that taking out a loan could actually, despite the interest rate, be more attractive?
Right. Well, yeah. So there's two components. One is it's the math problem of it all, right? I can borrow money at 5%, or I can give up this investment that's paying 10%. Well, I'll borrow at 5 and keep the investment that's paying 10 because I make more money than it costs me. So if you can out earn your loans, then that's what leverage is all about. But you want to use leverage sparingly in some situations. But there's also, I think, kind of the unwritten rule of skin in the game that I've had parents that could easily pay for whatever the kids want. And they still have the kids take out the student loan because it's like, well, they need some skin in the game. They need to earn $3,000 in the summer and in order to pay for their spending money. If they want to go out for pizza or beer or whatever, they got to earn that money because I'm not giving it to them. And then on top of that, we expect them to take out this $5,500 loan that they can sign up for. The interest rate's pretty friendly. They don't have to make any payments till they graduate, and it's just their skin in the game.
The loans that are in the student's name, it sounds like, are probably have better terms than the loans in the parents' names.
Correct. If you show a need, they can be subsidized. So then the interest rate is 0 while you're in college. So then, people often would say, why wouldn't I take a 0% loan? It's like, I can't. You would. You pay it off later if you want. The only exception to that would be if you get yourself in over your head and start defaulting on them and that kind of stuff. Well, then you didn't do yourself any favor.
We won't go deep on this at all, but I know there are also some loan forgiveness programs, depending on what kind of careers you go in. There are some employers that help with loan repayment assistance. And so, you have no idea what your child's going to do after college to be able to plan that way.
Right.
But if going into college, your child was like so set on becoming a public school teacher, there might be a world where some amount of student loans would actually have been the lowest cost in the long run, right?
That's correct. So there's loan forgiveness programs that are, if you graduate and go to work for a nonprofit, or if you go to work in an industry like teachers or firefighters, there's various professions now that they're trying to subsidize because they need more of them. And some states will do different things. Some states are doing engineering now, as an example. They're trying to get more engineers in their state. So you take advantage of those programs where you can, but I often caution people that, there's some pretty unhappy families out there are like, well, should I be taking these loans just so we can get them forgiven? I mean, it doesn't seem fair. And my general answer is no. I mean, it could happen, but I don't think that's not a plan. That's kind of a hope.
Yeah, I would never recommend anyone do something in the hopes that our government will do something in the future, because we're recording this before the 2024 election, and I would not put any confidence on what will happen. I have no clue, and this is not a political statement. It's just I would not want to make a financial decision in my life that was contingent on some future, act of Congress or, presidential veto, like something like that. So totally with you there. But I want to point out there are some student loan forgiveness strategies that certain career paths could make more sense than others.
Absolutely. Right. So if you need the loan anyway, well, then by all means, go ahead and take the loan, but you need to be able to see a path that works. If it works out and it's forgiven, life is good. If it works out and it's not forgiven, you still got to be able to survive and have a decent income, and you can't be so far underwater that all hope is lost. And we hear about some of those, recent graduates out there that are, so far in the hole that they can't figure out how to, earn enough to how to live. So you don't want to put yourself in that situation going in if you can avoid it.
I have a couple fun things I'll share. I'm going to do it after we stop recording with you, Brad, just because I know you're short on time and I want to maximize the time we have with you.
Okay.
So first, if there's any important point we missed, would love to hear it. And then I have one last question before we wrap.
We covered a lot. I can't recall anything in particular, but I think the bottom line is just do it. I mean, college planning and financial planning is they kind of go together as well. But I think college for a lot of families is kind of that first, okay, now we, these big expenses that are coming, we really need to sharpen the pencil and figure this out. Is this going to impact our own retirement? Is it reasonable to spend $20,000 or $50,000 or $75,000 a year per student? Some of those big picture things need to be worked out, and some reasonable guidelines need to kind of be determined early on. Because if you wait till the end, what I see is parents start to feel guilty. They didn't plan well or whatever it is. And they can always sign that big loan at the end to make it all come together. So that's, I think, where a lot of the problems come in as well, is we're all the way to the end. My student applied to very expensive schools and got accepted. And now I feel guilty about saying no. So I guess I'm going to sign up for the loan because we didn't plan well.
Yeah. And then some of these things, we didn't talk about deadlines, but the deadlines for merit aid, need aid, they might be before the deadline for applying. They might be at different times of the year. So not only plan ahead, but one of those planning ahead things should be to look at the dates, because they might be earlier than you think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So my parting question, and then I want to ask where people can go deeper, is how much do you think the average, so not ultra high net worth, but not below that kind of 100K threshold where the answer might be 100%, but the average person, is this something where if you plan well, you could save 3% on the cost of college, or is it like 20, 30%?
So I think the average family could save, 10 to 30% if they plan well, and some substantially more off the cost of their college. Certainly the stronger academics families can save tons of money One option may come in dramatically different than another, and they just need to be aware that the option existed.
All right. Now, obviously, we didn't hit everything. Where can people go deeper on all of this?
Right. Everything that I have is at tamingthehighcostofcollege.com. We've got our podcast, a newsletter, scholarship guide for busy parents, financial aid calculator, etc. And there's actually a phone number there. And if you call during business hours, we'll answer.
This has been awesome, Brad. When I was prepping for this, I read a lot of the content on your site and I listened to a lot of podcasts. It's really fantastic. I'm still in that early stage of planning with kids under 5, but I'm already starting to think about what I should be doing. And I have no doubt that in like 10 years, I'm going to be consuming a lot more of that content. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Like I said, I want to share a strategy I've been using on 529 contributions that I think is so amazing that I actually pushed back the interview with Brad because I wanted to be able to take advantage of it and I didn't think I had enough time. That deal, unfortunately, is not around today, but there's an iteration of it that is. I did actually end up being able to send it to all the Hacks members the morning it happened, and a handful of them got to take advantage of it. So in the future, when there's really timely deals that are like that, I do send them to members, allthehacks.com/join if you're interested. I'll talk about it and what it was. I'll talk about how it's evolved and how you can still take advantage of it today. I think the number one thing I hear from a lot of people is I wish that I could put my college savings or my college tuition payments on a credit card. And a few people that listen to this show have reached out and said, actually, their school or their children's school does allow that, but the vast majority of schools don't. I'm not aware of any 529s that let you contribute with a credit card. There are some schools that even if they don't let you contribute with a credit card, they'll let you contribute with a debit card. And there are a couple of debit card programs out there that do earn points or some kind of cash back, but they're few and far between. So that is an option. And then there's a credit card that hasn't come out yet called the Rise Tuition Card that I've shared in the newsletter in the past that, similar to the Built card, is going to be like a card that allows you to earn points on tuition. However, it is capped at $100,000 of tuition spend, which seems like a lot, but it only earns 1%. So that means that at most, you're going to get an extra $1,000 back a year. And I don't think that's trivial, but I just want to point out that relative to a sign-up bonus that could be even more than $1,000, you might want to consider it against opening up a new card each year that could be a higher ROI. If you did 2 cards or 3 cards, it'd be even higher, but just something to consider when thinking about new cards. The main deal that caused me to delay this interview and that I've been really focused on recently is centered around gift of college gift cards. So if someone isn't familiar, you can buy these gift cards and you can buy them online at grocery stores. And what they do is they make it really easy for you to give them to someone and they can apply them to their 529 account without needing to know where their account is and what institution. So I have the 529 for our kids at Wealthfront. And if someone were to gift me a gift of college gift card, I could basically go online, redeem it, and say, hey, send all of these funds over to my 529 at Wealthfront for my kids. So it makes it really easy to gift around 529 contributions. And you can buy these gift cards at convenience stores, gas stations, grocery stores. But the catch is they usually come with an activation fee that's about $6.95 when you buy them in a store. That means that if you're buying a $100 gift card and you're paying a $6.95 activation fee, you're effectively paying a 6.95% fee on the card, which makes it much less appealing. However, gift of college gift cards do come in denominations up to $500. So I'm looking at a list right now of where you can get them. And the few places that have that $500 level are Brookshire Brothers, Cumberland Farms, but not in Vermont, Food Max, HEB, Lucky, and Save Mart. Now, there are some other places like CVS, Fleet Farms, Stripes, and Walmart that have them at smaller denominations, but I'm going to focus first for a second on the fact that you can get them in store at a $6.95 fee. And if you were able to get a $500 value one, then if you're looking at $6.95 out of $500, you're only paying about 1.39%. So if you had a credit card that earned more than that, you'd have a little bit of a margin there. And if that card earned 4 points per dollar at a grocery store, well, then that margin's even bigger. So that's been something that's interesting. But if you don't have one of these stores near you, or they're not always in stock, or you have to drive around, that can be a little bit of a hassle. But I noticed the morning of this interview that giftcards.com was selling gift of college gift cards only at the $200 value, but they were selling it without an activation fee, meaning you could buy 5 $200 gift of college gift cards for $1,000 with no fee. So right out the gate, that's interesting. But at the time, giftcards.com, which has their own rewards program, was giving 2% back in points that you can use on their site. And giftcards.com was on Rakuten with a 2.5% cash back rate. So you could buy $1,000 of these gift cards. You'd get $20 of rewards on giftcards.com in the form of 2,000 points. You'd also get $25 of cash back on Rakuten, plus whatever points you got buying this on a credit card. So in my mind, if you stack that up, you get 2.5% on cashback from Rakuten, you get 2% on giftcards.com. And let's say you had the US Bank Smartly card that has already come out. You could stack those up for 8.5% back on your 529 contributions. That's amazing. Even if you just had a 2% card, you'd be at 6.5% off your college contributions. Now, I told you I did send that out to all the Axe members, so I hope a lot of people listening got to take advantage of it. But I'm not just going to talk about a deal that you can't take advantage of, because that wouldn't be that interesting, though it is good to know what kinds of deals do pop up from time to time. And one thing that I forgot to mention, on all of the cashback portals, there is usually a $2,000 cap on your spend on giftcards.com. So when I was running this all morning, I was purchasing $2,000. And then I was doing another transaction and another transaction and another transaction to keep that limit. And I was just stacking up all the Rakuten rewards, which I actually have my Rakuten account linked to my Amex account. So I was actually earning Amex points. So that was the play that happened then. A few things changed to the negative, and then one big thing changed to the positive. And I actually think the play might be even better now, but it's just a little different. So what's changed is that, unfortunately, you're no longer getting 2% in giftcards.com rewards, which, by the way, you do need to go into your account on giftcards.com and opt in. You're only getting 1%. So that's a bummer. Also, they are now charging a $5.95 fee for buying these gift cards. And unfortunately, the maximum gift card you can buy is only $100. So now you're stuck paying a $5.95 fee on $100, which means you basically have a 5.95% fee. They do give you 1% in giftcards.com rewards. So let's assume it's a 4.95% fee. So let's just round it and say it's a 5% fee to buy gift of college gift cards on giftcards.com. Now, if you use the Rakuten portal, you get 2.5% back there. Now you've got a 2.5% fee. And then if you were to use a card that earned 2.625, like one of the Bank of America cards with Platinum Honors, a Robinhood card at 3%, the US Bank card at 4%, yeah, you could probably make a little bit of a spread there. But the really interesting thing is twofold. So one, as of recording this, and unfortunately, by the time this is done, I don't know if these deals will be here or if they'll be replaced with better ones, but a lot of the airline shopping portals have these big holiday bonuses that I imagine, I could be wrong, would come back again as we get close to the holidays, where, for example, American said if you spend $1,600, you'll get a bonus 4,000 miles. On top of, on the day I did this, 2.5 miles per dollar. So spend $1,600, get 2.5 miles per dollar or 4,000 points, get another 4,000 bonus points. You end up with 8,000 American miles, whereas on Rakuten, 2.5% would have only been worth $40. I value American miles at over 1.5 cents because they're really difficult to get. They're not transfer partners of anyone. So that's a way better deal. But let's say even that's not available and you've still only got your 2.5% back on Rakuten. It still feels like it might not be a great deal. You pay a 5% fee, you get 2.5% back on Rakuten. You need your credit card rewards to beat the 2.5%, which is hard to do. Obviously, if you're in the middle of trying to hit a sign-up bonus, it would work, but otherwise, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So where I think it gets interesting is the fact that right now, there is a Chase offer, and I have it on 10 different Chase cards for 5% back on giftcards.com up to $50. Which means for each of those cards, you could spend $1,000, get 5% back, and that would negate the entire gift of college fee because you're paying a 5.95% fee, you're getting 1% back in giftcards.com rewards, and you're getting 5% back on Chase. So you end up with whatever those shopping portals are. So let's say Rakuten 2.5% plus whatever rewards you're getting on your card. So that's the trick I've been using. I've been playing with this as it comes and comes. I think it's still possible that in the near future, giftcards.com will actually bring back the $200 gift of college gift cards. That still says like $50 to $200 on the image on the site. So I'm hoping that comes back. These Chase offers don't expire till the end of the year. So there's no rush. Unless, of course, there are some holiday shopping portal bonuses or elevated cash back for giftcards.com, definitely keep an eye out for those. If you haven't yet activated some of these offers, for any offers, whether it's Bank of America, Chase, Amex, I highly recommend checking out the Card Pointers app. You can get a discount of 30% at allthehacks.com/cardpointers. And the reason why it's such a great app, and I mentioned this last week in the gift guide episode, is that for all these card linked offers, when you add them through Card Pointers, they go and hit the bank website APIs at the exact same time, so you can add them to multiple cards. So right now we have this giftcards.com offer on 10 different cards, which means if each one can spend $1,000, we could go spend $10,000 conceptually and get that extra $50 back on all 10 of those cards and negate the fee on all of them. And then any of the credit card rewards and any of the shopping portal bonuses are a bonus. So hopefully that's really helpful. Wanted to share that quick hack before I signed off today. Thank you so much for listening. Podcast at allthehacks.com if you have questions or you want to reach out. I'm going to read a quick disclosure that Brad asked me to read because if I do, he's willing to share this episode and I wanted him to be able to do that. I will see you next week.
Disclosures. The information provided to you today is for educational purposes only. It is not intended to be specific recommendations or advice. Please consult with a qualified professional before acting on any of this material. Investing involves risk. Depending on the types of investments, there may be varying degrees of risk. Investors should be prepared to bear loss, including total loss of principal. 529 College Savings Plan Disclosures. Investors should carefully consider investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses. This information and other important information are contained in the fund prospectuses, summary prospectuses, and the 529 product program description. These documents can be obtained from a financial professional or directly from the plan's website. Please read them carefully before investing. Depending on your state of residence, there may be an in-state plan that offers tax and other benefits, which may include financial aid, scholarship funds, and protection from creditors. Before investing in any state's 529 plan, investors should consult a tax professional. If withdrawals from 529 plans are used for purposes other than qualified education, the withdrawal could be subject to a 10% federal tax penalty, state penalties, federal income tax, and state income tax. Brad Baldridge's disclosures. Brad Baldridge is a registered representative with Cambridge Investment Research, Incorporated. Securities are offered through Cambridge Investment Research, Incorporated, a broker-dealer and member of FINRA and SIPC. Brad Baldridge is also an investment advisor representative with Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Baldridge Wealth Management and Baldridge College Solutions are affiliated. Cambridge and the Baldridge companies are not affiliated. The registered branch location is 2810 South Calhoun Road, New Berlin, Wisconsin, 53151.